My wife loves gardening and growing houseplants, so much so that I've built her 32 shelf feet of shelving for her houseplants in one room. She grows some of her plants in planters and buckets. They live in the yard most of the year, but they need to come inside for the 2 or 3 weeks of winter that we get here. The potting bench in the front room is filled with soil, which falls onto the floor and turns into dirt. Dirt somehow gets on the floor around the houseplants too. Fortunately, we have some help taking care of that. We call her Rosie. Rosie recently replaced Bertie, Roberta, who had the same job for 5 years before retiring a month ago. When there are buckets in the house, Rosie won't be able to clean around them very well. Winter is coming, and my wife asked me to make something for her to put the buckets on when it comes time to bring them into the house. Her requirements: it has to be tall enough that Rosie can clean under it. It needs to hold 4 buckets and the trash can of eternal stench. We have this lily that lives in a trash can for reasons, and it needs to come apart so it can be stored somewhere most of the year. It doesn't need to be pretty. It isn't furniture. It's something to hold the buckets when it's freezing outside. This is a perfect job for farm boy engineering. I've got this. I sketched up some plans and calculated how many board feet of hickory or sapele I'd need. On Friday evening, for date night, we drove the VW down to the Blue Home Center with a circular saw and some earplugs. We wandered through the houseplants and then went over to the lumber. I picked out 2 reasonably straight 8-foot southern yellow pine 2x4s and a not-too-ugly 1x12 plank of random softwood. Less than $20 out the door. We spent almost more time looking at houseplants than lumber. Out in the parking lot, using the cart as a sawhorse, which is still less janky than what I had back at home, I measured and cut each board at exactly the center and used a fancy red square to guide my cut. Of course I didn't. This is farm boy engineering. I guess it looks like it's close enough and start cutting, forgetting that I'd set the cut depth wrong. I guess the last time I used the circular saw, I was on 3/4 inch ply. I was only 3 inches off from center, which is good enough. We loaded the lumber into the V-dub and drove home. I brought it home and put it into the garage to let it acclimate for a good long while, almost a day and a half. You have to let your lumber adjust to the humidity of your workshop, or it will move after you finish your project. I figured it would take about 2 days to bash this thing together. Look at that awesome miter station I built. Why no, that isn't T-Track. I got this saw 20 years ago when we installed some flooring and baseboards, which have all since been replaced by professionals who knew what they were doing. But old Greenie made quick work of cutting the sections of 2x4 down to size. This is where I say something about putting a stop lock on to make repeatable, accurate cuts. I did. These legs are perfect. No, I'm not sponsored by DeWalt or Pony Jorgensen. Jorgensen. I did that thing where I bought a yellow cordless drill to replace my corded one that got stolen a while back. And well, you date your tools and you marry your batteries. As for the orange stuff, they make good clamps and the Blue Home Center carries their stuff. It's good. I like it. I start by ripping the 1x down into 3-inch wide strips. I did some precise load calculations to determine the optimal amount of material that it would require to hold the load. I made half-lap joints on the legs and the stretchers of the little ends that the top will rest on. I did use my tiny crosscut sled instead of freehanding it like a noob. Why is my crosscut sled so tiny? Well, I've never needed anything bigger. Yes, I engineered a tall fence jig to cut the half-laps, and by jig I mean I clamped a random piece of ply onto the fence. After finishing up the cuts for the end pieces, I had to cut the laps on the stretchers for the bed where the buckets will rest. These are 4 feet long, and I used the tiny crosscut sled to cut the shoulder. But to cut the lap, well, No high-fence jig can raise the ceiling up high enough to let that business fit. Hand tools it is. First, I tried rigging up something using the janky metal sawhorses that we bought for the goats to play on about 15 years ago. That didn't work. So I moved over to the Japanese-style low sawhorses that I made out of leftover pressure-treated lumber from when I fixed the picnic tables that the goats and chickens love so much. I use Rex Kruger's plan and power tools. Now, this southern yellow pine was much tougher than I had expected, and it moved a lot as I sawed it with the pull saw, pinching the blade. Balancing my booty on the edge of a 2x4 was not easy, and I only needed to make 4 cuts, but it took longer than necessary. This advanced technique is called the butter churn method, and my Amish ancestors are so proud of me. Assembly was quick. Just glue the bits together, drill some countersink pilot holes because all fancy YouTube projects require countersunk screws, and drive the screws in. I picked up this 12-volt driver on sale, not realizing that it wasn't a 20-volt tool like the rest of my kit. I guess I'm married to 2 battery systems now. That's awfully big of me. Turns out I really like having this mini driver. It's small and light and does the job. I was so frustrated with the goats' sawhorses that I decided to spend some money and get some new ones back to the home center. But they were out of stock at the one near my house, so I went to the next town over. That one is super bougie. The houseplant section had its own separate building. I don't have space in my 2-car garage, in which 2 cars actually reside, for a workbench. My workbench has been some 1x12 over the top of the janky sawhorses. These new Orange brand horsies have built-in clamps, dog holes, and bench dogs. That is already much better than my previous workbench. Living the dream. Back to the project. I was done. No sanding, no finishing. Just bolt some bits together and call it good. It's not furniture. It's just a place to store the plants when it's cold outside. And then I made a stupid mistake. I asked her, "Do you think it needs a coat of polyurethane?" Dumb move. Never ask the client for feedback. Deliver the product and move on. "Yeah, that'd be pretty good, since it's probably going to get wet." Oh, so close. So I spent another hour sanding, cleaning up the glue and making it look respectable. Then a coat of YouTube-approved Rubio Monocoat. I mean, polyurethane thinned with mineral spirits. It actually looks kind of good. It's not furniture, but it's something that looks like it belongs next to the potting bench, holding buckets and trash cans filled with stink. It's not the ugliest thing I've ever made. That's some pretty respectable farm boy engineering.